Welcome back to another episode of the Spartan Hoops podcast. We are inching closer to the start of the college basketball season, just 2 weeks away when this podcast airs. And I'll be honest, I'm starting to get a bit juiced from it. I know it's rivalry week, got a big game Saturday, but the Champions Classic is upon us. The football season has been fun, don't get me wrong, but I think it's pretty self-evident by both this podcast as well as the website. I'm a college basketball addict. And given that the offseason, there was about 500 to 600 of you who ended up following along for the debut of this podcast after the worst season in the last 20 years in Spartan Hoops basketball, I think there's quite a few fanatics out there. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for following along. I think this season is going to be much better. That's what we're going to get into in this episode tonight. We've got a great show lined up. I'm joined by our first-time guest, but hopeful regular contributor in the future this season for the podcast, a rising star on the college basketball analysis scene, the better-looking half of Sleepers Media and their new Field of 68 podcast, Unscripted, and perhaps most importantly, a guy that lives and breathes college basketball and bleeds green and white. My good friend, Carter Elliott. Carter, this has been long overdue. How the hell are you doing, man?
And I'm doing good. Definitely been a long time in the works, and I had to say the same sentiment as you, man. This college basketball season is here, and watching college football and all these fans back in the stadium, I can just picture like all the fans packing the Breslin, and I just cannot wait.
I can't wait, man. It's been fun, right? From a Michigan State perspective, we thought we're going to get 4 or 5 wins this season, maybe 6, go to a bowl game. Here we are, 7-0 heading into this big game, but for me, it's all about college basketball. If Michigan State wins, I'll be ecstatic. Michigan State loses, I'm turning the page basically on the season for the most part. I'm going to start focusing on basketball, and I'm probably going to do it anyways because we are right there. I'm excited to have you on today because I want to discuss MSU's roster, kind of do an in-depth breakdown, but I think probably a good part to start is just generally how you're feeling after one of the more brutal basketball seasons in both of our Spartan life cycles. Let's maybe start there. Have you firmly turned the page on the season? Are you willing to let bygones be bygones with what kind of went on? Chalk it up to a once-off poor season, or do you have long-standing concerns or grudges that you're holding against the staff from last season?
I think that I would have still held those grudges, but I like the moves that were made this summer with both players leaving the program, coaches leaving the program, and players coming in as well. So it's a situation right now where I'm just chalking it up to that was just an awful, brutal. That I don't want to say it can't get any worse than that, but I really truly believe it cannot get any worse than that, and it won't get. So I'm closing the book on last year. It is what it is. Whole different roster outlook, I think, but still with some pieces from last year. But I'm closing that chapter that was last year for sure.
Okay, I wrote 4,500 words on the roster. You can find it on SpartanHoops.com. I mean, it's as deep a dive as you're going to find anywhere out there. I backed up with film, some of the advanced stats on Ken Pom, all the rest of it. I'm cautiously optimistic that MSU is going to have a pretty decent bounce back season. What do you think about the roster composition heading into the season? What do you maybe like most about what you're seeing from the Spartans this year?
I think, well, for starters, I think an issue last year obviously was point guard play. And with the transfer portal the way it is right now, you have to give Tom Izzo his kudos, though he may talk shit about the transfer portal at times. He went out there and got one of the best PGs in the transfer portal this year in Tyson Walker. He's bringing back a guy like AJ Hogard, who now has a full summer, a non-COVID summer at campus, working out with people, being on campus with coaches. And then you have a freshman guard in Jaden Akins, who I think could be electric for this team. The potential with him is crazy. So I really like the way this roster is kind of shaking up. I think we solidified things at point guard. And that's that's huge for, a Tom Izzo team. When you think Tom Izzo teams, you think like Cleves, you think Cassius Winston, you think all these point guards. But last year, we had to think Rocket Watson, Foster Lawyer. Best of luck to those dudes in their next journey. But it's time to move on. And I like the way this point guard situation is shaking up because you have different options. Let's say AJ's not doing it for you. Give those minutes to Tyson. Maybe those guys get a break, give those minutes to Jaden. I think there's some, different style PGs that we have also. I like that we have that. So I think it's going to work out well this year at the PG position specifically.
I think it starts and ends, obviously, this year with the 1 and the 5 spot. And the point guard play last season for Tom Izzo was the worst that he's probably ever had. Is that a fair statement? I was
No,
kind of like looking back.
It was the absolute worst.
I mean, I don't even know on good teams if any of those guys would have played backup point guard for any of the rosters that we've had against good teams. And here we had a combination of three guys that were basically abysmal all season. I think it's interesting what you say, how aggressive he was and how thoughtful. Like the season ends disappointingly in the UCLA game. I think you can point to a couple reasons, but I think for me, the biggest takeaway from the end of last season was that Michigan State didn't have a primary ball handler to take us through the end of that game. It started getting a little tight. They make that run in the second half. Michigan State could have been in control of that game had they just closed it out. I think they were up 5 with 2 minutes to go. You need a point guard to be able to lead you to that spot, to put you in the best spots to be able to close that one out. And I think what we saw was, again, just the inability of the roster to be able to get it done. It was kind of a perfect encapsulation of exactly how the season went. Played the first half like they were one of the 20 best teams in the entire country and finished it like they probably shouldn't have made the tournament. And that's basically where they finished the year. And so we kind of got what we deserved. He then goes out after 2 weeks. Basically, he hunts down, identifies Tyson Walker. I watched all the film. I know you have too. I think this guy could be dynamic. I think he could be electric. You look at what is else in the conference this year. You have Andre Curbelo. You have Jaden Ivey. I think that there's a huge drop-off after that. There's no reason to me that Tyson Walker can maybe not be a guy that's, one of the top 4 or 5 point guards in the entire conference this season. He just has to play him. And I want to get your thoughts in the early chatter. We're hearing that A.J. Hoggard is potentially going to be tapped as the starter. How are you feeling about that generally after he addresses the point guard position, but then goes back to a guy who couldn't earn the job over Lauren Watts last season? Are you uncomfortable with it, or are you just thinking Izzo's going to Izzo, Walker's eventually going to take the reins, it's going to be okay?
You know what? I'm actually going to give you some credit on this one, DK, because when I started hearing that, I took to Twitter and I was very upset, to be honest. I thought that, Tyson Walker should be given the keys to this team. And that's the reason we went out and got him, is to give him the keys to this team. I mean, I don't know a lot of transfers that are really going out there to transfer to a team to, not play much. It's a very rare situation, I think. When you transfer to a team, you want to get some minutes and you want to play on the big stage. I think Tyson Walker is ready for that. Now, with that said, just because A.J. Hoggard starts for this team does not mean that he plays more than Tyson Walker. Now, I will be upset if A.J. Hoggard plays more than Tyson Walker, to be honest. I think that Tyson Walker should play more than A.J. Hoggard. I think what he brings offensively is better for this team. And honestly, even defensively, Tyson is a smaller player. He's not going to overpower anyone, but he's going to get in the stance and he's going to put some effort out there, and he's got pretty good hands from what I've seen at Northeastern. So I think that Tyson Walker at the PG position gives us the best chance to win. So I think he should play the most minutes.
Couldn't agree more. I've been basically beating my chest all offseason about it. I think that probably Hoggard gets tapped at least early on. And I said this to Greg. We did a green room earlier today, and it's one of these situations where if you had a couple non-conference cupcakes to start the season, you're playing Western Michigan or Central, and you want to start Hoggard and then tap in Walker when you're playing in a prime matchup, 100% get it. That's fine. I know Hoggard's been in the program a year. You want to help build his confidence. We all know that Walker's the best. I went and saw the live scrimmage. There's no doubt in my mind that Walker needs to play 25 to 30 minutes per game for this team to reach their ceiling. And so to me, it's a matter of time. But you have a prime time matchup against Kansas, top 3 team in the entire country this season. I think that they're probably going to fight for a 1 or 2 seed, just the way that this is shaping up in terms of their roster construction. They add Remy Martin from the Pac-12, the leading scorer in back-to-back years. And we're having a situation now where, are you really going to ask A.J. Hoggard to play 20 or 25 minutes against Remy Martin? Cat quick, explosive off the dribble. The matchup of Tyson and Remy is almost perfect. In my mind, like the best case version of Walker is kind of a similar to that. Maybe not as much in terms of point production, but what he can do in terms of decision-making in the pick and roll situations, off the dribble, being able to score at all 3 levels. I think they're actually kind of similar players. Just Remy Martin's done it in a Power 6 conference back-to-back years where he's shown the ability to be that type of electric scorer. Walker can give you that, I think that matchup will be just delicious to see, and it needs to happen for at least 25 minutes per game, or I don't think Michigan State's going to have a shot in game one, to be honest with you.
Right. And what I don't honestly see with this situation is, okay, if Tyson Walker was a freshman or something, you don't want to just throw him into the absolute fire, throw him into Madison or into Barclays Center, throw him against Remy Martin, and just throw him to the Wolves. This guy's played a couple years of college basketball. And on top of that, when you look at his biggest games at Northeastern last year, it was when they played the best opponents. He had that game against North Carolina where he came onto the scene. He was having big games against big-time programs. So I could see this being a Tyson Walker coming out party. But in order for that to happen, you know, he's got to play the minutes. So
he's got to get the PT.
He's got to get the PT. So he should. I from everything I heard from you and people who have seen Tyson play and seen these practices, he's shown that he can do it. So we just got to see how it shakes out. Hopefully it shakes out with him getting the majority, the bulk of the minutes.
For those fans who are curious on how to watch the exhibition games, we have this one Wednesday and I think next Thursday. The first game's against Ferris State and then GVSU. You can actually get it at the Big Plus. It used to be the Big Ten Network Plus. Now it's called the B1G Plus. It's $9.95 for a month. You can get access to all Spartan sports that are on there. So I already paid it. I checked it out today. I'm paying $9.95 to watch both those games. I don't care, obviously, about what the final score looks like. I want to see the rotations, and I particularly want to see what does he do at the point guard spot, because I just think it's so crucial after you have a season where you just had zero type of like production out of that position. My one caveat for playing the guy who's been in the system for 1 year is that he couldn't earn that job against lesser opponents. And now you're bringing in a guy who came to the program for the exact reason of playing in these big time games, of stepping on the big stage that he didn't get to at Northeastern and playing against a team like Kansas in the Champions Classic. It's the premier opening event of college basketball. I think it's a little bit unfair for him to be stripped of that ability to do it. And to me, maybe Hogarth's earned it this offseason. We're not watching every workout. We're not watching everything. I understand he's been vocal. He's slimmed down his body. He looks better. At the end of the day, his inability to be able to shoot from both the perimeter and in the mid-range is going to limit the ceiling for him. He's a guy that I think is a very high-level passer. I think he's a guy that can get into the lane very comfortably and make better decisions. He had too many turnovers last year. I think he can pare that down a little bit. But his ceiling of what he can be to me is just a very competent backup Big Ten point guard, something that Michigan State hasn't had. And maybe if Cassius Winston had a guy that they could have leaned on for 10, 12 minutes a game in 2019, he's not on one leg in the Final Four. You know, there's some versions of having the backup point guard that could have altered some seasons for Michigan State. That's where I see him at his best, a competent backup guy who's able to play decent defense, to run the second unit, and to give you some good pickup to be able to just spell Tyson Walker. But in the end, Walker's got to be the guy. I think we kind of both agree on that for Michigan State to reach their ceiling.
Right, and that goes for the people that are playing around, you know, Tyson Walker and Hogarth too. The fact that you really do not have to hedge or show any type of hard show on AJ Hogarth coming off a screen makes it extremely easy to guard him, because one, you don't have to get up there on the jump shot, and then two, because he's not an explosive or athletic guard, once he gets in the lane, he has a hard time finishing or doing the right move to kind of finish over a taller opponent. He doesn't really have an in-between game. Can pass it, has good vision, maybe tries to do way too much on passes sometimes. My coach used to say, hit singles and doubles. You don't have to hit home run passes every time. I feel like he has that issue. Maybe it changes. But with Tyson Walker's ability to run the pick and roll and have the ability for the vision, but also be a threat to come off of it and score, is just going to open up so many things for not only him as a player, but everybody else on the floor with him.
I think that's a great point. Who would you say is maybe the player that's going to benefit the most from having Tyson Walker as a dynamic ball screen guard in the offense?
Got to be Joey Hauser. I mean, It's got to be. I mean, we brought in Joey Hauser. We talked about this before. We brought in Joey Hauser to be a pick and pop, you know, big man, but he hasn't been able to pick and or pop because we don't have a point. We don't have a point guard for him to run it with. So it'll be a lot better if we can have him with a point guard who can run a pick and roll and also be a threat on offense. It's going to help Hauser out immensely.
I agree. I mean, he didn't have as bad of a season as everybody thought that he did last year. He shot 61% from two. I know he shot only 34% from three last year. I think he's a 40% shooter. You look at the shot, you look at the form. He's a pure shooter who just needed somebody to get him better in rhythm threes. I think we see that from Tyson Walker. I mean, you look at what he had. He potentially was going to be a pick and pop big next to Cassius Winston after coming off of playing with Marcus Howard, who you might say is a little bit of a ball hog, but an absolutely dynamic scoring guard that takes a ton of pressure on defenses and the ability to get him open shots. So he went from that to potentially playing with Cassius Winston to playing next to Foster Loyer, Rocket Watson, AJ Hoggard. I mean, what a disappointing run that must have been for him. And then on top of it, Tom Izzo's hyping him up to almost the extreme last season, over the top in his exuberance about what he can be. And it was almost like the expectations were too high, where if he would have had just middling expectations, I think he would have met a lot of those. I would like to see the turnovers come down a little bit. Obviously, the three-point shooting coming up. I think both of those can happen this season. And ideally, whether he plays 20, 25 minutes per game, kind of the same role, I just think his efficiency is going to increase this year.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think because of not only the bar that Izzo set for him, but also the fans and everybody looking at the bar that he set, we were looking at him through a lens where we wanted to see a lot more. And because we didn't see that on the offensive end, it basically highlighted his defensive deficiencies. So because we weren't getting if we were getting the offensive end, we were getting a 40% three-point shooter, and we were getting the buckets that he was getting. And for the love of God, I need Joey Hauser to be strong with the ball this year. That man, every time he had the ball in his hands, if anyone reached in, they were taking it from him.
I got a rule for Joey Hauser this year. If you can't get to your spot within 2 dribbles, you need to pick it up and kick it out.
If he's
taking 3 or 4 dribbles, he turned the ball over nonstop, over dribbling it.
Right, and that's not like a disrespect to Joey Hauser either. That's fine. That's the offensive player you are. You taking 4 dribbles equals Michigan State basketball not being the best we can be. So you need to accept that, and it's okay to do that. But what I'm saying is he needs to get back in that pick and pop role, be able to shoot like 40% from 3. He has the ability. The jumper's not broken. He's shown that ability to do so. Have a little self-confidence in himself too. I think he was getting down on himself a little bit last year and kind of show what he can do. But as a big man, you know this. It is way easier to play pick and roll when the guard who's in the pick and roll is a threat. Otherwise, you're just picking just a pick and roll. Like if the guy's not a threat, it's no point in doing it. So it's going to help everybody.
They're just going to play drop coverage on you, right? They're going to set the pick. The big's going to sag to the middle, and there's no roll, and the guard doesn't have to do anything in that situation because you're not a threat. You can recover much easier. So I'm 100% with you. Again, it comes down to the point guard play for so many parts of this roster this year. The one part of the roster where I think addition by subtraction, and when you're looking across the board of why Michigan State can rise up this year and be a much better team, to me, I think that they can be a much better three-point shooting team. Last season, they finished collectively in the Big Ten Conference at 30.5%. They were, I think, 13 out of 14 in the conference. It's one of the worst three-point shooting teams that Tom Izzo has ever had. Collectively, between Josh Langford, Rocket Watson, Aaron Henry, the top 3 volume three-point shooters, they took over just under 50% of the three-point shots, and they collectively shot 30%. So if you remove that from the rotation, and 2 of the most inefficient players on the roster that played in the actual rotation were both Josh Langford and Rocket Watts. They both shot below 40% from the field. They took 30% of the team's shots. You remove that in and you replace the most efficient player on the team's roster in the main rotation last year, which was Gabe Brown per the Ken Palm numbers, shot above 40% from 3. You mix him in with Max Christie, who's a long-range sniper, a high IQ guy. Now you maybe have arguably one of the best shooting tandems in all of the conference this season. There's quite a few guys that have gone out the door. I really like what Michigan State has on the wings. Maybe there's a little bit of thin depth there, but I do think that the 2 of those guys playing pretty close to 30 minutes per game are going to give you one of the more exciting transition and shooting tandems in the conference this season. What do you think about that position generally, and what are you excited to see from those 2?
Yeah, so speaking on Max Christie first, a.k.a. Cormac. I like to call him by his Cormac, my man. Cormac's a bucket. But I think one thing that Max Christie gives us going into this year is last year when we needed a bucket, we were like going to, probably Aaron Henry, right? Aaron Henry is not a player that I consider here's the ball, go get a bucket type of guy. Really good player. I think he has wiggle to his game. He can try to go get a bucket, not necessarily the player I want to give it with 10 seconds left or 20 seconds left and be like, go get a bucket. I think Christie can be that guy for us. I mean, he's that talented. He has the length. He has the shot. He has the wiggle to his game. It's a lot to put on a freshman, but he can handle that pressure. He's a really good player. And speaking on Gabe, I think that Gabe this year can be primed for an absolutely huge year. I mean, when you have a guy that's shooting high 40% from three, not only do people have to respect that, but Gabe, if he can put the ball on the floor and use his athleticism as well, that can keep the defense off balance because you have to close out to a guy who's shooting 47% from three last year in conference, something like that, something around that number. You got to close out to that guy. So if he can show the ability as well to put the ball on the floor and use his freakish athleticism, which honestly, in the clips I've seen from this summer, it seems like he's been doing that a lot more, especially on that baseline, being able to pump fake, go baseline, and put it on someone's
Rise
head.
up.
Yeah, I mean, he has the ability to do that. And when I saw him at Big Ten Media Day, he looked like he was 6'10", too, by the way. Like, I walked up next to him. I'm 6'7", and he at least had 2, maybe 3 inches on me. Now, I might not be 6'7" anymore. I might be shrinking. But, I mean, he's got the height, the length, and it's senior year for him. It's time. It's time to make that last leap.
I think if Josh Langford doesn't come back and Izzo's inability to be able to separate his loyalty and love for Langford in a lot of reasons had ill effect on the team. And that came, for both Thomas Kithier and Lawyer, and removing some of the temptation from the roster and allowing guys who were better players to flourish now. I just think that that's a huge story that maybe has gone a little bit under the radar. The addition by subtraction here, they trimmed basically all the fat that they needed to from the roster, and then they upgraded the spots with a really explosive incoming freshman class. You spoke about Max Christie. I'm with you. I think probably by February, he's going to be the guy that's the leading scorer for this team. He's a long-range shooter. He's a guy that I think has a little bit more creation upside than we've given him credit for, that he's been given credit for coming into college. He recently hit Sam Viciini's big draft board. He's one of the few guys that has him kind of as a fringe lottery pick. I have thought since he came in, he's a 1 to 2 year player. It doesn't seem to me like he's coming in with a mentality that he needs to be a one and done. The family comes, from a pretty wealthy area, so it's not a situation where he needs to get straight to the league. I think he's going to be kind of a little bit just driven with the process, and that's what it seemed like this season. He's made extreme physical strides in the last 2 years. He's really added muscle. That's probably my largest question, is what is he going to look on defense, and can he absorb contact near the rim and finish at the Big Ten level? I think that probably remains to be seen, but at least from a physical standpoint, it looks like he's making those strides. If he can get to his spots in the mid-range, if he can get all the way to the rim, I think he can be one of the more exciting just players generally in the Big Ten. Forget just Michigan State. I'm super, super high on him. I'm super excited to see him. And then you pair him with what I think is going to be a really solid year of Gabe Brown. You spoke about him. He looks bigger. He looks stronger, maybe even a little taller. I think that just as this is finally the year, he's been biding his time behind guys that he probably should be playing over. He's going to be able to shoot 40% from three this year. Just do what you do best, which is a straight line driver and finishing at the rim. He needs to attack the glass a little bit better. I think he's got to rebound better from the wing position, just given that Aaron Henry did so much of that last year, and they are going to miss that on the defensive end particularly. But I think that Gabe Brown can really give you a nice complement piece where you know what you're going to get out of him every night. Maybe Max Christie has some inconsistency as he goes through that freshman debut, but I think eventually you're going to see that engine pumping in the same direction, and the two of them flying up in transition when the fast break gets going. One guy's running to the basket and the other's spotting up, and both guys are shooting close to 40% from three, if not above. I think that it's just going to be way, way more explosive of an offense with those two guys on the floor from what Michigan State had last year.
It'll be way better than watching Josh Langford run to the 3-point line and put his toe on it and then shoot. I'll tell you that.
I can believe it. And Rocket Watts taking that like one-footed floater as he falls out of the baseline, not going towards the rim, doesn't even hit the glass. I mean, the inefficiency from those two is really hard to watch this year. And I think that at the very least what you're getting in the two guys now on the wings, they're smart basketball players that aren't going to take a ton of bad shots. Do they take some here and there? Yes. And maybe Max Christie's forced into that because of the role that they need him to play in spots this year. But I think for the most part, those guys are high level, high smart guys. They're going to just take better shots from that position this season. Let's move to the power forward spot. We touched a little bit on Joey Hauser. What do you think in terms of, do you care really who starts between him and Malik Hall? How are you feeling about Hall entering this season as a captain and potentially a starter? What do you see maybe his role being this season for the team?
Yeah, see, this is where I kind of get a little bit confused because if you were to ask me to put State's 5 best players on the floor, that's not necessarily going to be the best lineup. Like me personally, I don't really want to see Malik Hall at the 3. I don't think that is what's going to be best for this team and what will make Malik the best player. I think if Malik can show that he has a consistent jump shot, he can be a mismatch for any big man in the Big Ten, especially on the offensive end. On the defensive end, I think he can hold his own. I mean, he's 6'6", 6'7", but he's about 235 pounds, solid, strong, plays extremely hard. I just don't really know if a lineup of Malik at the 3, Hauser at the 4, and Bingham at the 5 is something I really want. So to me, I think I'd rather see like Hauser and a Hogard with the second unit, possibly. Maybe Hauser with the second unit, bump Malik down to the 5, maybe. I don't really know. I've heard really good things about Julius Marble. Maybe he slots in at that backup 5 position. But I think that at this point, I'm thinking Hauser off the bench, and then you have Malik at the 4, and then you have Bingham starting at the 5.
I think if you're looking at the lineup construction, you probably have some slight concerns about who the lockdown perimeter defender is going to be on the wing. I don't necessarily think Gabe Brown is ever going to do that. He has some length. He has some vertical athleticism, but laterally he's a touch slow. I think Christie, the one knock on him that you could say is defensively, maybe he's a half a step slow laterally as well. So you have some good length on the wings, but maybe necessarily not like quick feet guy. So I think if you're looking at maybe what Hall can bring to that starting rotation, it's a guy that can defend, 2 through 4 very comfortably and 1 and 5 in both spots. He's a guy that uses his strength extremely well. I thought he moved laterally actually pretty decently last season. So I like maybe some of the glue piece that he adds to it. I think he has a little bit more offensively to give. We saw in that Maryland game, and that's really the kind of the turning point for me in the season, where I thought to myself, like, maybe he's a much better offensive player than I'm giving credit for. We were up that Maryland game, if you remember, in the Big Ten, the opening game for Michigan State. They were up big. Then the refs kind of called the game a little bit differently, and Michigan State crumbled in that one, and we started getting slaughtered. And they were down like 15, 17, 18. It looked like it was going to go to a 20, 25-point game. Malik Hall refused to let that happen. He ended up dropping like 19 that game. He scored in a variety of different ways. He was super efficient. And to me, he just kind of almost took on the mantle of leadership. There was a couple huddles towards the end of the game where he wasn't letting guys quit. And I thought to myself at that moment, that guy's going to be a captain one day. And it ended up happening the very next season. I'm not that surprised by it. He's kind of a quieter leader from what Izzo has said, but I think that he's a guy that can kind of give you a little bit of everything. He can play make a little bit. He rebounds well. He can get a bucket. I think he actually is one of the better post players on the team in that mid-range, depending on the matchup. And like you said, if he's a guy that can maybe hit 35% from 3, take in 2.5 of those like a game, you make the first one and then you get to shoot another. If you miss the first 2, don't take another kind of deal. It's one of those situations. But if he's able to even help stretch the floor a little bit, given everything else that he can bring, I just think he's just a nice round glue piece that you can kind of put up and down the roster. I agree with you. Don't really see him at the small forward for maybe more than 3-4 minutes a game. I don't know what they're going to do if they try to go small ball 5. I think maybe Hauser is the guy they try there again, even though we've seen that with
Hauser at the 5. No, count me out.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I think both of them are bad options if they're to do that. There's 3 centers on the roster. You hope that one of those guys, or hopefully 2 of them, can kind of seize the major minutes from that spot. But all around, I just really like what he gives you. If you're looking at kind of a couple glue pieces on this roster, to me, he's maybe the mainstay guy that kind of does a little bit on both sides of the ball for you. Every good roster in the Big Ten has a guy like that, and I really like Michigan State having him, because I think that maybe he's one of the higher glue piece guys in the entire conference this season.
Yeah, and I think to go off your point as well, I think if he can show the ability to be a threat, or at least somewhat of a threat to stretch the floor, that's going to open up things even more for him. Because what I think Malik Hall, I think him catching it maybe at the top of the post or high key area and getting a big man on him, or getting someone with slower feet on him, and being able to make a dribble move, one or two moves, or even post him up and use his body and use his strength to go to the rim and finish. Like I stated earlier with Gabe, if you show the ability to knock down that shot at the top of the key too, that just adds a whole nother thing to the mix and makes it that much harder to defend you. It's always harder to defend a player who can do more than just one-dimensional things. So I think it's very key to him that he shows some type of progression this year with his jump shot. And also, speaking to the defensive end, I love that he is physical, but he fouls way too much.
That's fair.
But I mean, it's tough in college basketball. The handshake, like, you literally can't breathe on people sometimes. But that's the way it is. That's the way they call it. We had to keep him on the floor. He needs to stay on the floor for this team to be great. So he has to not foul as much.
All right, the last kind of position that we haven't touched yet, the center position. I think I'm more optimistic about Marcus Bingham filling this role than probably a lot of other people are. Greg has poo-pooed this, over and over again. I know what he thinks of Bingham, but I think that he does have Defensive Player of the Year upside in the conference. I think that when I went back and watched the film and some of the better games that he played, he's probably the most comfortable big guarding pick and roll actions and guarding the perimeter than anyone else in the league. And it's not because he's so laterally quick. It's because of his extreme length. He's a guy that constantly gets deflections, steals, blocks. He's a weak side rim protector, which I think this team is really going to need, because as we address, there's maybe not really a lockdown guy that's on the perimeter. So I think that some dribble penetration is going to occur, and you need a weak side mistake eraser. And Bingham has got to be that guy. I know we've said it every single offseason. This is his year. This is his year. I think that maybe maturity-wise, from what we've heard from the staff, and just generally his commitment to being better this season, I think that there's a lot of off seasons where we've talked about him maybe taking that leap, and he hasn't 100% made that commitment. It seems to me, from what the strength and weight room conditioning staff has said, he's the guy that in a lot of instances was leading the charge in the weight room, at least from consistently being there, of encouraging other players. And whether he's gained a ton of weight or not, which it doesn't seem that he has, he's just not one of those guys that's ever going to be able to do it. If he's added enough strength to defend the most important position because of the way that the conference is set up, just loaded again with the bigs, and make life difficult on the top half of the conference bigs, that's all he needs to do. What he gives you on offense, to me, is gravy. He's got to be, a guy that really makes life difficult for teams in the paint, because Michigan State absolutely needs that this season.
Definitely. I mean, the Big Ten front court gauntlet is absolutely it's sickening to think about. So, like you said, we've all kind of waited for Marcus Bingham to take that leap. And, I'm optimistic this year because I've said it on other, things that I've been on, but there's always been a big man or a person that I can think of taking that leap later in their career. Like, they develop, like Mike Costello developed later in his career. Xavier Tillman did the same thing. There's a lot of players in the Izzo era that take that leap and make that final step. And I think that this situation, quite frankly, for Marcus he's just got to it's like put up or shut up time. Like, I think he's going to get the minutes. I think he's going to have the staff behind him. We all talked about him trying to put on weight. That's been a thing every single year, but it's like a put up or shut up year for him. He has the length defensively, and he needs to use that because he doesn't have the strength. I don't think he's ever going to have the strength defensively. Now, he might be stronger this year, but he's never going to be like just a burly, big, strong post guy. So you got to use what you have and do what you do best. Use your length to affect shots the best way you can. And I think a big thing for Marcus Bingham also on the offensive end, I'd like to see him use his length on the offensive end as well. If you have you're a guy with a 7'4" wingspan, and I think you have enough touch that I've seen on your jump shot, you can have that same type of touch on a hook shot. Who's blocking that? Zach Edey maybe? But you had the wingspan and you had the length. I think he needs to use that length on the offensive end as well. And unfortunately, I think that Marcus Bingham might be a player that lets his offense dictate maybe what he does on the defensive end a little too much. So if he could get rid of that and just focus and hone in on defense and just make that your calling card, that is completely fine. And whatever you give us on the offensive end is a plus. And damn it, just shoot the three and leave him alone, Tom. Let him shoot a couple threes.
He's done it this season. I think it happened in the scrimmage. He took more threes than twos. The first bucket of the game that he had was a little turnaround mid-range floater. You know how he likes that little fadeaway. Yeah. I hate that shot. I really do. But he is pretty smooth with it. I just don't want that to be the first option on the team. You know what I mean? If you get 3-4 possessions into the game, give him one of those. But that shouldn't be if that's the first possession that we run because Hogarth's the point guard and the shot clock is running out and we feed Marcus Bingham and we get a turnaround fadeaway jumper on David McCormick, who's 6'10", 6'11", 260 pounds. I'm gonna lose my mind. That's not the shot. Yeah. It's all about shot selection for him. I agree with you. I think you're spot on in terms of him letting the offense dictate the defense. It needs to be the other way around. You want to be rewarded on offense. You want to have a free leash. Then show that you can be an absolutely dominant big player in the middle of the paint, because I think he has shown it in spots. His sophomore year, he grabbed 12 rebounds and blocked 5 shots against Illinois playing against Kofi Cockburn. Like that type of game, that is the mentality that you need to bring every single night. I'm not worried about my points. He didn't score any points that game. I'm not worried about my points. I'm worried about what kind of impact I can make on the defensive end. If he buys 100% into that, you're going to start getting touches because finally you got a pick and roll guy. How is he not getting more lob looks? He's 6'11".
You know why he's not getting more lob looks? Because he doesn't have a point guard who can come off the damn screen.
Exactly. And now he has it this year. And I think that maybe that's a little bit underrated too when we're speaking about guys who can really use a ball screen heavy guy. You have Marcus Bingham at 7 feet with the 7'4", 7'5" wingspan rolling into the middle of the paint with Tyson Walker coming downhill. It's going to suck in the entire middle of the defense. And now you turn and look. Hauser's on the floor next to Gabe and to Max Christie. You have 3 40% shooters with a 35% shooter with the ball in his hand and a lob threat at the rim. That's a completely different offense than what we've seen. And I think it could be explosive. I think they could be one of the better Big Ten offensive teams this year. I do have question marks defensively. Bingham's going to be a huge part of that. But I do think with Tyson Walker in that mix, I just think that both sides of it are going to be much better for him. So
because we're going to have trouble people this year, there's going to be a lot of people that are blowing by to the rim. And that's where we need our guy with 7'4", elastic go-go gadget arms to come out and alter shots. Like literally mentally, Marcus Bingham every single night needs to be like, all right, like I'm playing against a damn near first team All-American. Probably you're playing against Hunter Dickinson. You're playing against Coburn. You're playing against Travion, Edey, Trace Jackson Davis. Like mentally, he needs to go into that game and be like, I'm going to make these dudes' night a living hell because I got 7'4" wingspan and I'm going to make it tough on them. And he needs to take pride in that shit.
I agree. And I think the first game when we see him play against David McCormick, who I think I probably would rate maybe right alongside Trevion Williams. If you're looking at kind of like if he was in the Big Ten, where would he fall into the classification? Coburn 1, Hunter Dickinson 2, TJD 3. To me, he's right a guy that's kind of right around maybe where I'd have Williams. He kind of finished with similar stats last year. He's not like a dynamic low post scorer. He kind of has just extreme physicality and length. He's an over-the-top lob guy, and he's got a decent kind of like little baby right hook where he comes and he's got a little, like over-the-shoulder flip. But he's a guy that's going to be a good physical matchup and test for what what Bingham is going to see, and Michigan State in general will see from the Big Ten Conference this season. It'll be a really good barometer to kind of get a measurement of, okay, can Bingham go toe-to-toe with this guy? Because this guy is maybe the 4th or 5th best Big 10 big if he was in this conference. If he doesn't look great against game 1 against David McCormick, I think probably I'm not going to hit the full-on red panic button, but I think the yellow button would maybe start being tapped a little bit like, okay, what's Michigan State's floor if Bingham can't protect the paint? Because I'm not sure there's a guy behind him that Michigan State's going to actually play that is capable of doing that. Who do you see primarily being the backup? I mean, it seems as if Marble is going to be that in this instance. What are your thoughts in between Marble versus Sissoko, and what do you think is the best case scenario, I guess, from Marble this year?
I mean, everything I've been hearing from Izzo and everybody else is that Marble just had an unbelievable summer. Now, I've heard unbelievable summer about a lot of players before.
We heard about Foster Lawyer last year, so
yeah, right. Like
not taking any money to the bank on that one.
Right. I love Tom Izzo, but he's been a coach that's been known to lie to me, and he lied to me a couple times. So
he blatantly lied to us last year.
Yeah, blatantly lied to us when we don't like liars. But, the backup 5 situation, I think it's going to have to be, if Marble is what Izzo has been saying this summer, I think it'd be ideal to have him at the backup 5 minutes. But I don't think it's a situation where I want it to run too long or run its course. Like if the Marble at 5 thing's not working, pull the plug before it even gets going, and we find something else, whether it be Malik Hall at the small ball 5, or give Maddie some minutes at the 5 to put some energy out there. Hopefully he's developed a little bit. I haven't really heard much about him. I don't know if you could tell me what you've seen so far, but I think that it has to be a situation where if Marble doesn't step up, we got to figure some shit out, whether it be Malik Hall at the 5 or Marcus Bingham just having to play a dangerous amount of minutes.
How many minutes do you think Bingham gets this season? Maybe we start with that, with kind of like just a barometer where you think the center position minutes are going to shake out.
Can you tell me how many he got last year?
It was like 11.2 or something. He played. Yeah, he didn't even play 12 minutes last year.
Whew, wow, that's bad. I think it has to be at minimum 25 minutes a game.
I'm hoping for at least 20 to 22. I think if Michigan State's the best version of itself, it's going to be closer to 25. But it wouldn't surprise me if maybe it's closer to 22 minutes per game. So you got 18 backup. I would say probably 10 to 12 end up going to Marble, and then probably the remainder to Sissoko. I personally am not a Julius Marble guy, and that's nothing to do with me not liking him as a person. He seems like a really good kid, a hard worker. I think he's a little foul prone. I thought defensively he did make some strides last year, but he's 6'8". He's got shorter arms. The Xavier Tillman comparison, just even putting Julius Marble and Xavier Tillman in his mouth and saying that at the same time for Tom Izzo, was to me the most more hyperbole than saying that AJ Hoggard was running the break as well as Mateen Cleaves. I thought that was so far beyond what you could ever say. What Xavier Tillman did in terms of what he became as a junior defensive player of the year, his ability to defend the pick and roll, Marble has shown none of that. No. And it's not a knock on him to say that maybe I like the upside of Mady Sissoko a lot more. I understand he's much more raw in terms of offensive ability. Julius Marble is not giving you that much on offense compared to what he is defensively. For me, if you're looking at the way that this rotation is kind of working itself out, I think there's quite a bit of scoring on it. What you need at the defensive position is somebody to lock down on defense and clean the glass. Mady Sissoko is probably a better option than Julius Marble at that. If you're looking at the defensive rebounding percentages from the team last year, Joey Hauser, Malik Hall, Marcus Bingham, and Mady Sissoko all were better defensive rebounders by quite a large margin than Marble. He's just not very long. He's not very big. I know he's physical, and I think offensively he kind of gives you a little bit more at that position. I don't think he's a trustworthy guy where you can dump the ball and consider it two. I don't really like that maybe sometimes the offense runs through him. I think he should be a 4th or 5th option, just like every center on this rotation. So for me, if you're looking at what is the best case scenario for that position, to me, it should be played defensively, and it should go Bingham and then Sissoko, because regardless of the raw ability, you can use Mady for fouls. That's completely fine. He's more than physically capable of matching up, and he did so last year against some of the better Big Ten bigs, because he's just 6'9", 235 pounds of pure raw muscle and steel and athleticism. And he's definitely going to clean the glass and protect the rim. Maybe he's overzealous in both of those aspects, and sometimes you're going to give up some buckets on that side because of it. But there's no questioning his effort and his ability to clean the glass. If you're looking at potentially down the road, if Bingham is off this roster and Marble is playing ahead of Sissoko for this whole season, where are we entering in for the center rotation next year? Is Julius Marble a starting center in the Big Ten? That is maybe even more of my concern than what happens this year. Is looking ahead to next year. That is very worrisome to me.
Yeah, true. And honestly, with this past summer, I thought that Julius Marble, like you said, I like Julius. I have nothing against him as a person or anything like that. But I thought that he would be one of the players who thought about leaving. And I thought we would maybe think about bringing somebody else in. Now, whether that be a younger guy who maybe has a couple more years that would help solidify the front court rotation for next year, or I had this wild idea in my head that we could somehow get Theo John from Marquette. And like he would just be just
apparently he's been tearing it up at Duke. They sound like he's going to be 20-25 minute per night.
Just an absolute mammoth of a human being who plays defense and is going to defensive rebound, like literally the complete opposite of Marcus Bingham, just an absolute physical monster. Would have been perfect. Okay, that is what it is. Let that shit sail. Enjoy the Duke brotherhood. Enjoy Coach K's loser tour, whatever it might be. But anyways,
loser tour.
Yeah, nah, ain't no flowers come from me, man. Go ahead, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But that's definitely a concern because the best case scenario for Michigan State is not Julius Marble being our starting center next year. So we'll let that shake out next year. Hopefully something happens. We had the transfer portal. We got things that we
thank God for Jackson Kohler coming in, baby.
Yeah. Oh, huge, definitely. But also Jackson Kohler's not a defensive guy, I don't think. So you need someone there. But
I know.
We'll cross that bridge when we have this episode next.
All right, that's fair. We can. But I think if you're looking at the way that this center rotation should shake out, ideally, I'd like to see you playing more Matty Sissoko down the stretch of the season. I'm not sure that happens. I think his loyalty to Marble and after everything that he's been through with his father passing and just generally going through the engineering program, he sounds like he's finally got his feet on the ground and he's able to kind of balance the two, which sounds like it was a problem the first couple of years when that program is extremely demanding. So that's understandable. I'm not sure the physical upside's ever going to be there. To me, he's almost like a guy that would have been better slotted as a power forward had the opportunity provided itself. But because that position is maybe the most locked down of any on the roster, he's never going to have the ability to do it. So maybe he would have been in a better like Kenny Goins guy where he's rebounding from the power forward spot and not the center position. He's hitting like little mid-range jumpers and maybe eventually can stretch it out because I actually don't think he has a terrible stroke. I just don't think we're going to be able to ever see that evolution because of the way that the roster's constructed. And so he's going to be leaned on to play a position where maybe physically he's not capable of defending at the Big Ten level. And as a result, there's always going to be issues with him on the court, at least on the defensive side.
And there's a reason when you're looking on basketball stats, there's not a category called loyalty because loyalty doesn't win you basketball games. All right. So I'm all for loyalty, but at the same time, loyalty doesn't put the orange thing in a 10-foot thing. All right. So I love it, but at the same time, we got to win some damn basketball games.
Yeah. So I think when we're just looking at this generally, maybe the thing that excites me the most, besides the fact that I think that the center spot could still be in flux this year, and maybe there's not a clear answer. I'm still hopeful it's Bingham. But if that doesn't shake out, maybe that lowers a little bit of the floor. But I think what I like most about this team is just the roster flexibility. We haven't spoken about Jaden Akins yet on this podcast. To me, he's a guy that's going to be able to come in and play off the ball. I know you spoke of him at the point guard position. I would like to see it. I'm not sure if we do maybe more than a handful of minutes here and there, but he's a guy that if you're looking at maybe trying to put some more defensive pressure on backcourts, if you put Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins next to each other and Marcus Bingham at the rim, you got two guys that can be absolute ball hawks, in my opinion. And then you position that with a guy who, if you're overplaying a little bit and maybe even gambling some spots because those guys are putting so much pressure, they can then protect it on the weak side. I think there are actual scenarios where maybe this roster has some defensive upside. Maybe the best lineup for this team doesn't have that happening. I actually think maybe the best lineup for this team, and I don't know if we ever see it this year, would be Tyson Walker, Jaden Akins, Max Christie, and you actually slide Gabe Brown down to the 4, and you just have a bunch of shooters around Marcus Bingham and a few guys that can create, a couple guys that can lock down. I really would like to see maybe that come into play at some point in time, but I think that you can kind of slide guys up or down depending on the rotation goes. Besides being slightly thin at the small forward spot, which I think we would both agree, I don't think Pierre Brooks is going to be quite there this year. It sounds like maybe he's going to be more of a spot minute guy, a guy that as an upperclassman I think is really going to be a fan favorite, but maybe it takes him a couple years to get there, just given the way that he came in physically, which sounds like he's a little overweight, and also just the level of competition and the structure that he played with at the PSL. I think team concept, both offensively, defensively, is a bit of a learning curve that he's catching up to, is what it sounds like. But I think it's a situation where if this team can stay healthy, Max Christie and Gabe Brown cannot go down, knock on wood, with any type of lingering injury, because I think the roster really blows up if that happens. But I like kind of the pieces in that Izzo is almost forced into playing some of these guys prolonged minutes because there's just no other option. I think that's the most exciting part, rather than having the juggling of what do I do with Langford and Watts and Brown. Brown's playing 30 minutes per night. There's no other guy to do it. So I think if this roster can stay healthy, they can build a core rotation that I really, really like and I think is generally flexible. Do you have any final thoughts on what you think about this team heading into the season?
I really want to go off what you said because I think that's one of the best points that you said so far. It's not an issue where we have to worry about Gabe Brown not getting his minutes because of a player like a Josh Langford. Like that was very frustrating last year. The fact that some players who we thought maybe should get more minutes weren't getting them because maybe they had a guy like a Josh Langford who was, he was playing like 30 minutes a night. No matter what he's doing, he was going to be out there. But let's say, God forbid, Gabe Brown or Marcus Bingham do one thing, and that leash was so short they got their ass yanked out quicker than ever. So I think it's just a situation where we're going to have those type of players finally getting the minutes we want to see. We have some stability and options at point guard, which is huge. And we got guys, we got like a nice mix too of like some younger pieces with Christie, and we also have some guys who have been through the Big Ten gauntlet and seen a lot of shit. And also, who should have a fire lit under them after what they went through last year? Because they might have went through one of the worst seasons in Michigan State basketball history. Like I don't know if it actually is, but I'm pretty sure it's up there somewhere. And as a fan, it felt like that last year. It felt like the world was crashing down. So they got a lot to prove this year. So I like the makeup of the team. I like the way it can shake out. No injuries should happen. But I don't think we have to worry about it being as bad as last year. I think this is a top, I would say 5 team in the Big Ten. I think they should finish right around that 5 spot.
I like it. I think to me, maybe one of the more under the radar storylines that hasn't really been discussed is Tom Izzo with the fire in his belly after a lot of the season that went awry was on his shoulders. He's come out and said mea culpa, multiple times. I know you were at Big Ten Media Day and he said it over and over again that the last season was a large part on his shoulders. I do agree with that. But if you're going to mea culpa, then you probably should start Tyson Walker because you're starting the season in the kind of a similar situation. I won't dwell too long on that. We've already discussed it. But I think that if you're looking at what this guy is when he's coming to the latter part of his career, that fire has got to be burning so bright after you've been discounted. You're not in the top 25, which, he said he understood. He's got to prove it this season. But this is kind of one of those under the radar compositions where all the pieces fit. Maybe there's not a superstar, but there's just a lot of good pieces. If the roster can vibe together and get going in the right direction, I think that they could spur some momentum and actually be maybe a dark horse Big Ten, competitive type team down the stretch for a title. Maybe it doesn't come together quite enough time, but I do think that this is a team that's going to be a really tough out. Fans coming back into the Breslin Center, like you said in the earlier part of the podcast, one of the best venues in the entire country in the Big Ten. These are all things that I think just kind of build towards the season coming for a bounce back. This is going to be a bounce back. I feel good about it. How good about it, I guess we'll see maybe after the first couple games. But I do feel reasonably comfortable that the nightmare of last season has ended. And at the very least, this is going to be a very competitive team that I think maybe can put it together come March. And maybe they can't win a Big Ten title, but maybe this is a team when we're looking at, a couple of them, that they're a top 2 or 3, maybe 4 team entering into March in the Big Ten where you're like, okay, who do I not want to see coming out of the Big Ten in the tournament? I think Michigan State's going to be on a lot of people's lips because regardless of where they land on the seed line, I do think that this is a team that's going to be a really, really tough outcome March.
Definitely. I hope to drink a lot less this year watching Michigan State basketball because last year they had me on a bender.
I hope it's pleasure drinking. I enjoy a nice brew during the game, but I hope it's like a victory beer.
Right, like a victory beer instead of like an absolute pain and despair.
Sad beer? Yeah, I know. I agree with you on that. I do want to touch this briefly too, and we didn't talk about it. The schedule for Michigan State allows them a pretty nice flip into the Big Ten conference play. I think the non-conference is a bit of a gauntlet, particularly with how young they are. They face Kansas. The battle for Atlantis is absolutely loaded. I think there's maybe 4 or 5 tournament teams in there, a couple teams that'll be in the top 10. Chicago Loyola, the first game is going to be a dogfight. I would love to have you back on because I know you're friends with Drew Valentine, and so you can get a pretty good pulse exactly of maybe what that's going to look like for their squad this year. So the non-conference is pretty tough. You go to Butler, you get Louisville at home. Butler's kind of a fringe tournament team, but Louisville looks to be maybe a top 4 or 5 team in the ACC. Maybe it's a little down this year, but they're kind of on that fringe of what they should make the tournament again this year. So I think you have a really tough non-conference, but the way that the conference schedule sets up, They're playing 6 of the first 7 teams. Only Michigan is really expected to make the tournament. They see 6 of 7 teams that will probably end up finishing kind of the bottom 4. It's a really gentle way after a tough gauntlet to say, like, okay, maybe here's a couple easier wins to start the season, and you can build some confidence heading into it. So if you can maybe start the season 5-2, 6-1, I think that there's a real chance then where you're like, okay, we're almost halfway through the season. We're right in the thick of things. Maybe then it turns on a dime and this team can kind of put it together for a stretch run.
Right. And definitely. And we don't want to get in another situation where we're just like fighting out of a hole. Like we get the situation last year where it's the last week of Big Ten and we find ourselves having to beat Michigan, beat Ohio State just to even sweat it out on Selection Sunday. Like that was not a fun feeling. Don't want to do that again.
Never again.
Never again. So I think the best case scenario, though, is if you have to do some things, though the non-conference is going to be tough, let those tweaks happen then. I always commend coaches for being able to change on the fly, but with the best case scenario, I think by the time we reach Big Ten play, maybe a couple games before Big Ten play, we should have everything solidified. Like who's our PG? Everything should be set in stone by then. That's the last possible date it should be set in stone. I'd like it to be set in stone off rip, but obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
it's not the way it's done. But I agree with you. If you get into conference play, you know who your starting point guard is. You basically know your 8 to 9 man rotation and everybody's solidified in the spot. That's part of the reason why last season went so out of control. Part of it was the roster construction in the whole, but the other part was just like he could not make his mind up or set a rotation for the life of him. And
we had players asking to come off the bench. We had players asking, we were in shambles last year. I don't even like thinking about it. It makes me irritated, but
It makes me a little sad. But we got there. Thank you, Aaron Henry, for dragging this team to the tournament. We owe you one for that, my friend. I think maybe one of the more under the radar Spartans that'll go down just for keeping that streak alive. So who is the most important player on the MSU roster not named Tyson Walker or Max Christie?
Man, I feel like I got to stay consistent because I said a couple of different people, but I'm going to stay with Malik Hall. I think Malik Hall is going to be special this year. I think that he could be a mismatch against other bigs in the Big Ten. I think he has all the ability there. I think he has the mindset. I think he encompasses what a Spartan dog is. Like he's just gritty. He's maybe not the tallest, but he's strong as shit, and he's gonna play really, really hard and hopefully stay out of foul trouble. But I think he takes a jump this year on the offensive end, and just really shows himself not only to be a really good glue guy, like you mentioned, but also be like a guy who we can count on every single night to give us what we need to win. So I'm gonna go with Malik.
Repping for him. I like it. I'm a huge Malik guy. I think that this could be a very big season for him too. I like that pick for sure.
Are you going Gabe? Are you going Gabe?
Man, Greg has pretty consistently said Joey Hauser, so I wouldn't say that, even though I do think, the ceiling of this team has him, maybe as a top 2 scorer, top 3 scorer. I think if you're looking at maybe how the scoring breaks down, there's 4 guys that I expect to be somewhere between 10 to 14 points per game. So I think you could probably pick any one of them as potential. I would maybe lean Marcus Bingham just because I don't know if he can't give it to you at the center spot. I think it really starts going downhill fast for this team. I just think he really is the X factor for keeping the floor kind of in very comfortably as a tournament team. And if for some reason he is not up to the level that we need him to be, I think that unfortunately the front court kind of just starts getting into a very sketchy place. So I would maybe lean on Marcus Bingham.
DK, that scares me a little bit. You say my season's riding on a Marcus Bingham breakout here.
Season's riding on it. I'm just saying maybe the comfortable floor for this team. I mean, if he is what we think he could be in the defensive end, I think you just feel more comfortable going into every game in the Big Ten. And if he's not, then it does worry me about where is the protection for the rim coming from the best big conference in the entire country. You're just going to see the who's who of, the top 20 guys, top 10 guys every single night. You got to find a way to be able to at least clog that paint a little bit and make it difficult. And if you don't, I think it's just really tough to lean on all the perimeter shooting, which they would kind of have to do to be able to dig them out of a hole every single game.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Who finishes the leading scorer for this team?
think Max Christie.
Love it. I think, like I said, 4 guys that'll finish 10 to 14. I would say either Tyson or Max Christie. The best version of this team for me is Max, end up being the leading scorer for this team. Where do you think he lands? Maybe somewhere between 14, 15 points per game?
I was thinking like right around 15.
Okay.
Right around 15. And, maybe he really gets it going and maybe touches that like 17. That maybe be
if he touches 17 points per game, we might not see him another season. We want him to play just as well as he possibly can to give Michigan State the best chance at winning every game and making a deep run, but also good enough where he can come back for one more season.
Be good, but don't be that good.
Okay. Who finishes the leading rebounder for this team?
I think it's going to be Malik Hall. It's not going to be Bingham.
I think it's either Hauser or Hall. I think it was maybe Hauser last year.
Was it?
It was close between him and Henry.
Really odd thing. Gabe Brown should be a much better defensive rebounder. He's an absolute monster on the offensive end. He just crashes the offensive glass like crazy. He had so many offensive rebounds last year, but for some reason it doesn't translate defensively.
I have a theory. Part of why I think that he doesn't is because he's a leak out guy and you see him constantly leading the break. The problem is this year there's no Aaron Henry to go clean up the boards for you. So either Malik Hall and Joey Hauser need to do it. Bingham needs to be much better on the glass, the two of them collectively, because if you want that transition break to go, you almost have to leak guys a little bit. But I think that the wing rebounding has to be better for this team this year because defensively, again, I think there's going to be some question marks with this team. You got to hold teams to 1 possessions if you're going to be any good on that end, I think.
Yeah.
So, but I agree with you. He needs to be better on the defensive end. I think he averaged like 2 rebounds last year. He should be averaging 5 rebounds this year.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the starting rotation for this team? And by mid-February, what's the closing lineup in crunch time situations?
Okay, so I'm going to go Tyson at the 1.
We're saying starting the rotation for the season. Who's going to start? You think
who's going to start?
Yep. I think it's pretty clear that it's Brown and Christie. He's already said as much.
Yeah, Brown and Christie. So am I Tom Izzo or am I me? Because Tom's going to start AJ, obviously.
Okay. Obviously, we both would start Tyson Walker. Is Hall or Hauser going to start under Izzo's view?
I think Hall starts.
I think he does too.
Yeah, I think Hall starts. I think they bring Hauser off the bench, which – though I want Tyson Walker to play, honestly, having Tyson and Hauser come off the bench to run a pick and pop actually does sound pretty good and works pretty well. But at the same time, I will beat this to the death. Tyson Walker needs to play more than AJ Hogarth. He has to. So
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And then closing lineup, we're in mid-February. You're playing, Illinois. A big crunch time game. You're close. What's the closing lineup look like for this team?
So I'm going to go Tyson, Christie, Brown. Ooh.
This is the tough spot. I think this is the real question. Whether Hall or Hauser starts, it doesn't really matter to me. I think Hall is going to have to take a big offensive leap for you not to say Hauser might need to be the guy because of the spacing. Even though defensively,
what if I get crazy and close with Malik at the 5 and then have Hauser at the 4 closing?
Okay.
I think I might get crazy and go to that length and not have Marcus on the floor. The closing.
Okay. Maybe we see some version of that. I just think if you're looking at, Malik Hall guarding Kofi Coburn in this particular scenario, I'm not sure if I like that.
Yeah, very true. Good point. But
yeah. Where does MSU finish in the conference? You kind of already answered that. You think he's like maybe 5th. What do you think the ceiling is for this team? You think is 5th the floor or is that the ceiling?
I think if we finish 5th, I would be like happy / content with how our season went. Just because I think the Big Ten is really, really tough this year, obviously, as it is in past years, but it's also very, very tough again. But the ceiling, I think we can challenge, to be a top 3 team in the Big Ten or, even challenge, even challenge to win a Big Ten title. I think we have the ability if we put it all together. Of course, it's going to be very, very tough, but it's not going to be a situation. I think 5th is our floor. Like we need to finish around 5th. Right now, our team is a 5th place team in the Big Ten, but the ceiling is a top 3 finish to me.
I think probably they land anywhere between 3 and 7, and it just matters how some of it shakes out for them. So I do think maybe the floor is a little lower than I would like to admit to myself in the deep, darkest parts. But I agree with you. I think anything less than a top 5 finish for me will leave a bad taste in my mouth, because that probably means you're on an 8, 9 or higher seed line. And I don't think that bodes well for you trying to make a Sweet 16 in there. I think the goal should be to win a couple of these big non-conference games. Again, if you somehow miraculously beat Kansas, what do you think that line's going to be when it opens? If you had to take a guess.
It's got to be Kansas.
6 or 7 would be.
Yeah, it's gonna be north of 7 for sure.
You think north of 7?
I think it'll be north. I think it'll be north of 7.
I think because it's opening night and the matchup, even despite that, the way that the computers are, I think it's 6 to 7.5, somewhere around there.
You know what? I think it'll be set at honestly, I think it'll be set somewhere 8, 8.5. Wow. But people are gonna hammer it basically, and it'll be 6 by game time.
If it's 7 or 8, what are you taking?
If it's 7 or 8, first of all, I'm hammering Spartan's money line. Fuck that noise.
I like the hedge against the heart. You take the Kansas with points or whatever.
All right, first of all, yeah, it's all cute, but Remy Martin is a certified loser boy. He puts up stats and he loses. Okay, so I don't really see him.
I think Bobby Hurley's the loser in that combination. I don't think Martin's the loser. I won't lie. I think he's going to take the step and be able to integrate himself into the program. I really do. But I hope you're right. I like your version better.
Second best point guard on that team.
Well, who behind?
I like Yesufu from Drake.
So I was reading an article, and we won't dive too deep into this, by CJ Moore, and they're saying Yesufu is going to get 16, 17 minutes is what he thinks for his minute allocation, which I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I mean, I watched some of it. I think Remy Martin and Yesufu could actually play together, and I think it would be one of the most dynamic backcourts that you can find in the entire country. But it sounds like Christian Braun is going to get the start. I don't know how familiar you are with him, but they kind of have 3 bigger size wings that all kind of fill a similar role. Jalen Wilson can get downhill a little bit more, but I'm going to butcher his name, but Oche Abachi. Is that how I say it? Yeah. So he's the kind of the 3-point sniper, and then Braun is kind of somewhere in between where he's a good, not great shooter. But for me, that best version of their team probably has a smaller backcourt. I think Martin's going to be a tough out every night. And if he can assimilate and just be a little bit more efficient, I mean, he's pretty exciting to watch. I'll say that at least. He didn't win a ton at Arizona State, but it was fun to watch him.
I know right now I can tell you AJ Hogarth cannot guard that man.
He cannot. That's going to be so evident in the first 5 minutes of that game. And for me, the staff needs to immediately make an adjustment if you see that. If he blows by him on back-to-back possessions, I'm just going to be on Twitter going, Tyson Walker. I mean, I'm already going to be saying it before it, but I will definitely be screaming it.
I'm already picturing Remy Martin blowing by him for the 4th time, and just Bingham helps up and he just lobs it to McCormick.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And then we're
down over and McCormick's dunking it.
And it's 12-2 before I can even get myself settled, and there's a timeout. We don't need that.
Yeah. I don't need them to win that game, but I need them to be competitive with 10 minutes to go. I want them to still see them competitive the whole way through the last, for 30 to 35 minutes, play competitive basketball, and just let me know that you're capable of hanging with what will end up being probably one of the top 5 to 10 teams in the country for the entire season. If you can show that game 1, I think I'll be pretty happy with that. But if you start the game and you're getting blown out because of some personnel decisions, I'm not going to wig out, but I might wig out a little bit.
I will wig out. We need to use this game to set the tone. Yes, I want us to win, of course, but this game needs to be a tone setter for the year. And that's tough to maybe put on the first game of the year, with a whole lot of new pieces. But at the same time, we need something to set the tone for the rest of the year.
Wash the bad taste out of your mouth from last year. You know how you correct that? It's you play the right guys the right amount of minutes, and you don't tinker game 1 in a game that could probably move you up a seed line. If Kansas ends up being a 1 or 2 seed and you somehow win that game, and you have a tough Big Ten conference where maybe you didn't win as many games as you'd like, when the committee's taking a look at your resume and you got a win over a 1 or 2 seed, that's a seed line bumper. That takes you from maybe being a 5 or a 6 to potentially being a 5 or a 4. I think it's a huge, huge swing game. And that's almost not talked about enough in college basketball. The non-conference games matter. You look at Ohio State. I think
they always bring up quad one
10
wins.
and 8 last season in conference play. Their non-conference schedule allowed them a 2 seed.
Right.
That right there just speaks to the volume of how important these early games are. Like, tinker with the lineups when you're playing against the cupcake teams. Play who you need to play to win the games against the matchups that you need to win.
Right, exactly. On Selection Sunday, all you hear is quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins. Like, you need those big type wins. Those really matter. So we gotta attack this game. It's big.
Getting into the Big Ten, top 7 teams. I want to hear what you got.
Okay, I got Michigan 1, Purdue 2. Oh, Purdue 2. I got Ohio State 3. I have Illinois 4, Michigan State 5, Maryland 7, and Maryland 6, and then I will go with, who am I forgetting at 7 right now?
Indiana.
I'll go Indiana at 7.
Okay. How many teams do you think the conference gets this season? Between 7 and 8?
Yeah, I think between 7. I think between 7 and 8. And I also want to make my damn claim to staple right now. Ohio State will be a top 3 team in the conference, and EJ Liddell will be Player of the Year.
I'm okay. EJ Liddell is going to be the Big Ten Conference Player of the Year.
Yes.
Okay. I like the bold take. I'm going to push back because I actually had some Ohio State stats. I did not know you're going to choose them 3, but it kind of works out well.
Okay.
So Chris Holtman's been at OSU for 4 years. This will be his 5th season. Over that 4-year stretch, during the last 4 games of the regular season between all 4 seasons, he's collectively 6-10, so he has well below a 500 average. He's only won more than one Big Ten tournament game once, which was last season. He went to the Big Ten title game and then lost to Illinois. And in the conference play, he's been to 3 NCAA tournaments. He's 2-3 with no Sweet 16 tournament appearances. I wanted to give him all the credit in the world, particularly what he did with a roster that didn't make the tournament year 1. He turned Keita Bates-Diop into a Big Ten Player of the Year. They finished, I think, 2nd in the conference that year, and they just had like a generally much improved season after Thad Matta kind of just like fizzled out a little bit. And I thought to myself, this guy's going to maybe win a national championship before, maybe some of the other programs in the conference. And then he's kind of faltered a little bit down the stretch of the season and hasn't really performed in the tournament play. So while I do think that he deserves some credit for kind of just the stability of the teams that he kind of has teams that always finish in the top 5, 6 every year. He hasn't really been able to show the ability to play well coming into March and into the tournament. So I kind of want to knock him down a peg or 2 there. The one large question that I have, and I'm curious how you're going to answer this, is where does the perimeter shot creation come from when the shot clock is winding down? Because last year they had Dwayne Washington Jr. Love him or hate him, he's a guy that could go out and get you big buckets when you needed to, take kind of some of the tougher shots when it came down to it in the lineup. He's now gone. They replace it with, CJ Walker's gone as well. They've got Jamari Wheeler, who's not that guy. They got Cedric Russell from, where's it, Louisiana? Is that right?
Louisiana Tech.
Louisiana Tech.
Yeah.
Who's kind of a long range, like high volume, like 3 bomber, but not a guy that creates. I know Malachi Branham is coming in. He's a top 35 kid, combo guard type. Justin Suing is really not a guy that's like a huge creator. To me, he's maybe kind of like what Malik Hall maybe could be in terms of just a really nice complementary piece that plays good defense, that rebounds well, that scores, 10 points a game. I'm not sure if Hall gets there this season, but that's kind of what he was last year, Justin Suing. So where do you see the shot creation for this roster coming? That's my biggest concern for this team. I think they play extremely fundamental on both sides of the ball. I'm just worried about like shot clock winding down, who's getting that ball.
True. And a lot of my base for the point that I make is actually Justice Suing taking a step this year. because I think that he has the ability. He's shown the ability to, somewhat have a little bit of playmaking. I mean, he's a 6'7", longer wing, has a very respectable jump shot. It wasn't really falling last year, but I think he's shown to be a respectable jump shot. I think he can have the playmaking ability. Wasn't really needed to be showed when you have a guy like Walker last year who was just a steady, don't have to worry about it situation at point guard. And then you also had Dwayne Washington out there to go get a bucket. But I think Justice Sueing takes a step this year and shows a little bit of playmaking and maybe be that guy who can make a play at the end of the clock. And then, if he's kicking out to a Cedric Russell, or he's kicking out to even a guy like Justin Aarons. I mean, he's a knockdown shooter, a little guy, but he is a knockdown shooter. I think that a lot of it is going to be based on if Justice Sueing can kind of take that step as a playmaker. But I just really like this Ohio State team because I think that Ohio State team run through E.J. Liddell is just way better than a team run through Dwayne Washington. Like, God bless Dwayne Washington. He was a bucket. But I think that they can better utilize E.J. Liddell as the main source and the main, kind of peg on this team.
I do like E.J. Liddell. I had him pretty high on my top 10 Big Ten list. I had him behind Kofi Cockburn. If I'm kind of looking at it, I don't love the center position behind him. If they could anchor him with a defensive big so that some of his liabilities are covered up a little bit on the defensive end. Kyle Young is okay. He's kind of one of those hard-hitting rim guys, physical player, but maybe not quite a rim protector. I actually like Zed Key. He reminds me a little bit of a poor man's right-handed, Nick Ward. He's kind of built in the same way. He needs to get in better shape, but I think that he can give you some buckets down low. You pair that front court together. I'm not really sure it's ideal defensively. I think obviously at the point of attack with Jamari Wheeler, you're getting better there. That's an upgrade in terms of at least the defensive side of the ball from CJ Walker. I just don't really like the backcourt. I guess maybe Sueing could give you a little bit more from that, but he doesn't really, to me, have the wiggle off the dribble to really be able to break down guys and get into the lane. So I do maybe worry a little bit about that. I think that's my largest concern. I think Holtman is a good coach. I think they're pretty consistent. You know what you're getting when you have a Big Ten Player of the Year candidate like Liddell. I think it makes sense to run much of the offense through him, but I do get a little bit concerned when it's in crunch time, who's going to be able to create those shots. I think that's probably the biggest concern for them. So I don't mind it. I don't hate it. I think I have Illinois at third, maybe a little higher than you. I know Greg has switched his opinion there, and he has them maybe winning the conference this year. I think that at least the 1 and 5 combination is going to be as good as it is anywhere in the entire conference. Obviously, Curbelo is a wizard. He needs to take care of the ball better and maybe shoot a little bit better and keep defenses honest on the perimeter. But when you have, a behemoth, a 7-foot, 270-pound, 90-pound behemoth in the middle, that, maybe he's not a good passer and maybe he's not really a great post player, but what he is just a mammoth of a man that gets 2 feet in the paint at will and finishes when he gets there. I think that that's a really solid foundation for you to have. And then you look at what else is on the roster with Frazier, and you have Plummer and Williams, kind of the same note type guy, but you can surround him with some shooting. Maybe Hutcherson or Grandison takes that step forward this year. I think that's my biggest question, the wing forward spot for them. Can they take that stride to be able to maybe complement it? But I think if you surround Curbelo and Cockburn with shooting, that's a pretty good recipe for a top 3 finish. I probably would keep them in, but I don't really have a problem. I have Purdue 1 versus Michigan 2. I think the backcourt still has questions for Michigan. I'm not saying that Purdue's is like great, but I think Jaden Ivey maybe carries a little bit of the shot creation in that role. I'm kind of with you. I have Michigan State at 5, and then I think it's a toss-up between Indiana and Maryland. Maybe Maryland has a safer floor, but Indiana potentially has a higher ceiling with Trace Jackson Davis. And then I think I probably have Rutgers at 8, then maybe one of those fringe tournament teams kind of right there in the mix, and a team that you don't want to go to the rack to play for sure. I think I like what you're saying. And again, you look around the rest of the country, top to bottom, again, probably the toughest conference in the country. Do you think that that's a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because like you just mentioned, the team at Rutgers can be really, really good this year. You have Geo Baker back. You have, I think, a healthy Ron Harper Jr. I think that ankle injury was still nagging him last year. Coach Pike will talk really, really highly of Big Cliff Omarui, I think his last name is, at Big Ten Media Day. a 5-star level type talent. If he puts it all together, he could be really big for this team and step into the role that Miles Johnson had last year. So there's a lot of talent in the Big Ten. And also, Penn State, they're not going to be good this year. I will say that. But down the road, everyone should be scared of Penn State and Micah Shrewsbury.
You're a Shrewsbury guy. You're on board.
I think Shrewsbury's got the juice. So he scares me a little bit. He's going to make Penn State into something.
They got to recruit. I know they just got a top 100 guy for the next class in there, top 125, something like that. So he's got to recruit there. I think that's the biggest, issue. And then, it's just a tough place to recruit. Football is always going to be number one. They have a really hard time putting fans in the seats. I know they haven't had much to cheer about over the years, and I get that. But even when they were going to be a tournament team in 2020, that stadium was still like half empty at all points. They have sections where they're covering over sections so that you can't see it on the broadcast. That's not good.
Yeah, definitely not a good sign.
Okay. Dark horse Big Ten team to make a run in the tournament this year. So I would say one of your 3 teams that are not in the top 3, I guess. So in this scenario, you could pick Illinois, I suppose.
Okay. I'm not going to pick Illinois because I think that's an easy cop-out. Actually, this goes against what I said in the past because I don't believe in Mark Turgeon and Mark in the tournament. But I think that Maryland could be a sleeper team because, one, Fats Russell could buy in and be a very good player at the point guard position for them. And 2, I think people don't talk about Eric Ayala enough. I think he's a really, really good, solid, guard. And people don't really talk about him much. And then the big man transfer they got from Georgetown. Yeah, they've been talking very highly about him as well. So they have some pieces with that team. That Dante Scott was kind of like a pick and pop for. They got a system.
Dante Scott is a more efficient version of Ron Harper Jr.
Wait, are you saying that Dante Scott is better than Ron Harper Jr.?
Yes. Yep. That's how I had him in my rankings. Look at the numbers and the efficiency from last year. Dante Scott was a way more efficient player. Way more. And they're almost the same. They're almost the same type. They're kind of like a undersized power forward, oversized, maybe like wing type. He shot like above 40% from 3, way more efficient. If you gave him the same volume last year that Harper took, I think he would be better. I mean, I get Harper had an explosive start to the season, and then he fell on his face and he shot like 32% from 3 again. Like everything went downhill really rapidly. I don't know. That seemed just like a little bit of fool's gold to me for Ron Harper Jr. I'm not buying it. We've seen so many years from both Baker and him. I don't really like either of those guys, to be honest with you.
I'm staying strong with the fact that I think Ron Harper Jr. is the next Dylan Brooks. I'm staying strong. I'm staying strong on my take with that one.
I didn't hear who you said. Dylan Brooks, is that what you said?
Yeah, Dylan Brooks from the Grizzlies.
Yeah.
I think that's Ron Harper if he can, maybe get in a little better shape. But
yeah, he's got to get better shape.
Yeah. I say my 3 teams would be Michigan State, Maryland, and then I'm actually going to go with Rutgers. I think Rutgers is talented. I think they have an old team. Geo Baker's been there for God knows how long, forever. And I think they have the ability with a healthy Ron Harper and then a big year from Cliff. And I love Peichel. So I think
I'm a Peichel guy too. I think eventually if he wants to make runs at Final Fours, he's going to have to move to a different program. And I get that he built Rutgers up from nothing, but there's a ceiling on what that program can be. And I think it's probably, he almost reached it last year. They would have beat Houston, made it to the Sweet 16. I think that probably is kind of like around there. Maybe he could sneak into an Elite 8. I just don't see the talent coming to New Jersey to play at Rutgers. So I think that if he wants to take that next step, he's eventually going to have to go to a bigger program somewhere.
Yeah. Also kind of scared about it, maybe a Dane Fife revenge tour where he just goes on an absolute tear and Indiana just makes a run.
I don't know. I'm not a Dane Fife guy. I shed 0 tears when he left the team. I've always thought he was just kind of a weird and odd guy. I mean, nothing against him personally, but I just heard he was a weird dude.
Clarkson boys, man.
Yeah, that's all that needs to be said there. Okay, we're almost done here. If you could add 1 player from the Big Ten roster to Michigan State this season, so any of the active players on the roster, who would you add to make them a more complete team, and why?
It's definitely going to be I think it's going to be at the 5 spot for sure.
Of course.
Got to be at the 5 spot. My heart wants to pick EJ Liddell, but I'm not going to do it. My heart wants to pick him, but I think it would have to be Hunter for me. I think Hunter would be who I would add. I think that Hunter's an underrated defender. He's 7'2". He's really good with that left hand. Really, really good with that left hand. So
maybe he finds the right this year. I doubt it though.
Yeah, underrated passer too. It had to be Hunter for me.
I would say Trace Jackson Davis. I think, Michigan State obviously recruited him. I think that they would know exactly what to do with him. I think that he could have been used a little bit better in the elbow situations, taking a dribble or two. He's super fluid in transition. I think he'd be a great big running the floor, maybe the most fluid big in the entire conference. And Indiana just didn't get out enough in transition to let him shine in that role. I think he could be much more efficient. I'm a big TJD guy. I think he'd be an All-American candidate if he played on a better team. I really do. I just think he's got stuck in a roster where there hasn't been much shooting around him. Maybe that's slightly upgraded this year. Have to see what happens between Johnson, Bates, Kopp, and Parker Stewart. Those guys have got to shoot better for him because Race Thompson's going to be next to him for large parts of the game, and we know that that's not really a spacing, help for him. So that really is going to be the determining factor for me if Indiana can reach their ceiling is can they space the floor a little bit better this year. Safer floor, higher ceiling. I'm going to tell you two teams. I want you to tell me who has the safer floor and who has the higher ceiling. Purdue and Michigan.
Purdue has the safer floor, I think. I think Michigan has the higher ceiling.
I would agree with that. OSU, MSU.
OSU safer, Michigan State higher ceiling.
Okay, that's where I'd go with it too. Indiana, Maryland.
Maryland higher ceiling. I'm sorry, not Maryland. Sorry, Indiana higher ceiling. Maryland safer floor.
Okay. Illinois and Michigan.
I'm gonna go Illinois safer floor. Michigan higher ceiling.
Okay, I think that's exactly how I would have had it. So, listen, man, I so appreciate you coming on. We ran almost an hour and a half, but it was fun. I love Greg, obviously, but I don't get to just geek out and have some optimism about the Spartans. He's always trying to throw a little, he's throwing some shade here and there. He's always kind of just trying to poo-poo all the happiness that I'm trying to find.
Basis, man.
You know better than I do. You've been with him longer, so
that's what I'm saying. I needed this. This was good. This was
I think it was cathartic. I think if you have the time this season, we need to do it at least once a month. We'll call it like the DK and Cart therapy sessions. Hopefully it's happiness that we're talking about, and maybe like we're coming on here after big wins and we're just drinking beers and chucking it up. And if it's some misery along the way, then we'll be there just holding each other. Two big fellas.
We'll go through it
two
together.
Big fellas cradling each other in their arms.
As a unit, we'll go through it.
That's perfect, man. Well, thank you again so much. Again, this is Carter Elliott. You can find him on Twitter. He just revised the handle. It's at Carter Elliott. That's 2 L's and 2 T's with an underscore at the end. Sleepers Media, they just came out with a new podcast, Field of 68 with Rob Doster and Jeff Goodman. It's called Unscripted. You can find that. They do live streaming stuff as well as on podcasts, both Apple and Spotify. Thank you again, my friends, so much for your time. Had a bunch of fun. 2 weeks away. Let's go.
Let's go, baby. Appreciate you having me on, DK.
Anytime, man.